Welcome back to the Waggle Duff Golf Show. I'm Matt Tizard, and in this show, I'm going to give you a betting preview to the Zurich Classic of New Orleans. This is a super fun, interesting event where, let's be honest, we're not going to go too mad statistically. There's not a whole host of data that we can look at, but what we can look at is team chemistry, because this week is a team event. We've got 80 pairs turning up. 33 will make the cut after Friday, heading into a weekend shootout where we've got round 1 and round 3 as a 4-ball bettable style, and round 2 and round 4 as alternate shot foursomes. So for TV, you see a bit of negative press online, you see a bit of negative press from people, not going to bet this, not going to watch it, not really that interested. But I'll tell you now, for the players, there's a lot on the line this week. And let me give you an example. Cam Smith won this competition, went on in 2021 to win the Century Tournament of Champions. From there, he did really well at Sawgrass and ended up in the final group at the Masters. So this is a real stepping stone. We saw it with Brooks and Chase Koepka. This week we've got Alex and Matt Fitzpatrick in the lineup, and there's a lot of other players coming over from Europe in particular who can use this as a springboard for bigger and better things. So when it comes to betting, I'm going to be looking at chemistry, and I'm going to be looking at what there is to play for to try and find a bit of value down the field. Before I break down the course, look at the player list, and then make my selections, I just want to ask if you could subscribe to the channel. The reason for this is Waggle Duff is an online fantasy golf game. It's completely free. I run it in my spare time. And the more people that like and subscribe this video, the bigger the reach, the more players hopefully will play the game online. And ultimately that will result in bigger sponsors and better prizes for you guys, the players. So if you can subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. So this week we're at TPC Louisiana, back at another Pete Dye design course, but this is not like Hilton Head, it's not like Harbour Town, of course, it's not like TPC Sawgrass, or even like the match play that we saw a couple of weeks ago. This is quite unique in a sense that, well, it's really easy, and we're going to see lots of birdies, a really low scoring week. I'm going to jump into the course breakdown in a moment, but we're looking for players that can make a hell of a lot of birdies, and that's going to be encouraged because we've got, for 2 days, a 4-ball bettable style event. Easy for me to say. TPC Louisiana is built across 250 acres of swampland, so you'll see some crocs when the commentators are bored of the golf. It's very wet. There's water comes into play on about 8 of the holes. It's built on sand. There's 71 plus bunkers, but it's quite open. It's quite easy. The rough isn't very penalising, and actually that can be shown here. So let's jump into the stats and have a look at TPC Louisiana. So first and foremost, as I said, not a great deal standing out here. It's a Pete Dye design course, quite long, 7,425 yards, but relatively straightforward. There's not really any benefit for bombers here, albeit length will be advantageous. We can see in the high correlated stats that, approaches from 100 yards, 50 to 125 yards are ranking as high as it does here, but actually, do you know what? Strokes gained in approach, that's typically what the best players do well, and it's always going to have a higher value because, well, it's one of the most important stats, if not the most important stat in success. So there's not a great deal to stand out here. And actually, my tact for this week is not to build a model based on what the course dynamics is. We're going to look straight into the player list, and we'll look at some of the dynamic and chemistry of some of the players teeing it up this week. So looking down at the players and the pairings here, it's actually really difficult statistically to build a picture of who exactly is looking in good shape versus who potentially isn't. I mean, we know, for example, Kurt Kitayama and Taylor Montgomery are going to bring a lot of length with Kitty and some great putting. And, as you can see here, really good in terms of total strokes gained. But actually building a picture is very difficult. I'll be perfectly honest. One of the methods of play this week is, put your units on Patrick Alexander, put your units on Colin and Max. You could probably get a nice little double 1-2 there, and then just leave it and sit back. So it's going to be difficult. I have found that Boyle Sports are doing a market without those two, which is which is one of my bets this week, which is quite interesting, but yeah, statistically really difficult. So I'm going to talk about my 3 tips and picks, very much twofold. So in terms of who's got something to play for going into the week, who maybe doesn't have what's available, but then also who has good chemistry, who's paired with someone we know they get on with and has been built in that kind of environment of foursomes, four-ball, bettable, and team-based events. So if I scroll down, my first pick and tip is a little bit opposite to what the course requires in terms of length, distance, and an approach play. But we've got a pair here of Zach Johnson and Steve Stricker that you can currently get without the top 2 on Boyle Sports for 100 to 1. Now, if you look at their strokes gained total, it's 1.53. Now, the reason for that is twofold. Actually, Zach Johnson's been showing recently with some pretty good rounds, and you can see here he's made the last 2 cuts. Steve Stricker is an absolute winning machine when it comes to the Seniors Tour. And he could definitely still compete on the PGA Tour if that's what he wanted to do, if he wanted to play the events. But he competes now on the Seniors Tour. His form this year is absolutely ridiculous. So he won the Mitsubishi, tied second at the Chubb Classic, tied 8th at the Collegard, tied second, in the Hogue Classic, and at the Gallery Classic most recently, at the end of March, he was tied 5th. So the guy doesn't play badly ever. And that's a really, in terms of pairings with chemistry, that's exactly it. You've got the Ryder Cup captain coming up, someone that was most recently Ryder Cup captain, and there's just a really interesting dynamic between the two of them there. So I took Zach Johnson and Steve Stricker at 100 to 1 without the top 2. As we scroll down, my second pick this week is Matt Wallace and Callum Shinkwin that you can get for 67 to 1 on Betfair. Now, my thought with this was a little bit biased in the sense that I am English, but I do know that for both Matt and Callum, they would have been brought up on this format from the age of 14 right up to the age of 21, unless you've turned pro. If you're playing amateur golf, you'll be playing on the UK county circuit. So these two would have had an incredible amount of gameplay in foursomes, alternate shot, and in four-ball bettable. And for Matt Wallace, he's in absolutely incredible form. Look at this. We got the win at the Corrales. We got the 7th at the Valspar. He's playing exceptionally good golf at the moment. And for Callum Shinkwin, this is just a free hit. And let me explain why this is such a big opportunity for people like Callum Shinkwin. The reason is if he wins this tournament this week, he will then get a 2-year exemption on the PGA Tour. He's up in sticks from England and getting the first flight across to the US. He will also be playing in the PGA Championship upcoming. He will get an exemption to the Masters next year. He will play in the tournament Century of Champions. And as I said, we've seen with Cam Smith how that changed his life. And my final play is of a similar ilk, and we've got a little bit more experience in this group, I'd say. In Torbjorn Olesen, who is a bit of a serial winner, particularly in Europe. Some fantastic results over there. We watched him win last year at the Belfry, at the British Masters. But between the pair of them, I think compared to Wallace and Shinkwin, this course suits them a little bit more. It's wetter, longer, really requires long drives, good iron play, as most courses do. But this is more of a 7,400 yard course, where last year it was more about irons off the tee position. You could play without the driver. Not here. Now, that does make me worry when we think of Stricker and Johnson, my first pick. But for Olesen and Højgaard, they can go low enough to compete. So to wrap things up, I am betting on Steve Stricker and Zach Johnson without the top 2 power pairings. I'm backing Matt Wallace and Callum Shinkwin, and also Højgaard and Olesen. Best of luck with your picks for this week. If you could subscribe to the channel, that would be fantastic. There's no Waggle Duff Fantasy Golf this week, but we're going to be back next week with Fantasy League and betting previews for the Mexico Open at Vedanta. Best of luck. Please gamble responsibly, be gamble aware, and I'll see you next week.